welcome to our May 2023 QualiWare User Group meeting. My name is Cecile, and I would like to welcome you all to a great agenda that we have today, which I'm going to review now. We're going to go through some introductions and housekeeping, and then I'm going to hand things over to myself. Normally it would be Kevin, but Kevin is away today, and I'll explain why, and then we'll do a quick update on some CloseReach news. Then I'm going to hand things over to Denise Boisvert-Dingley. Denise is going to talk about the shared services approach to translation in QualiWare, and that should be very interesting. I'm sure a lot of you are interested in that topic. Mike Haley is also on with us today. Mike is going to talk about improving productivity and financial management in the public sector with QualiWare using some real live examples that Mike has. And then last, but certainly by no means least, our senior architect, Andrew Stephen at CloseReach, is going to talk a little bit about a guide that he's developed to using Archimate in QualiWare. So without further ado, to get going with the CloseReach news and some housekeeping.
Cecile, are you recording?
I am. Thank you for reminding me. I did. I hit the record button. Actually, just before we get into the CloseReach news, I will go through some housekeeping. So I meant to do that before. Just to make everybody aware, this is a public meeting. So there are people on this call from CloseReach, from our clients within the Government of Canada. There are non-Government of Canada people on the call. So do be aware of that. We are recording the meeting today, so if there's any privacy concerns, just be aware of that. Your name and your face, should you choose to share it, are out there in the public domain, so do be aware of that. Hi, Walter, waving. Our recording of this session will be actually made available onto our CloseReach YouTube channel. So again, as I mentioned, it will be in the public domain, so just be aware of that. I have left the option to have your video camera open in the meeting. So if you would like to share your video, you're welcome to, but you're not required to. Most of us in past meetings, thank you, Barry. Thanks a lot for the photo bomb. Most people leave their cameras off, but you are welcome to share it if you wish, and you are welcome to do a photo bomb, just like my friend Barry did. Also, your microphones have been left open so that you have the option of turning them on and turning them off. So please be aware of this. We have struggled in the past occasionally with people who are not aware of background noise, especially those working in offices with others around you. So please just be aware of that. Leave your microphone on mute until you want to actually participate and say something in the meeting. You're welcome to use the chat. I will keep an eye on the chat as well. But if you have a question, and we're at the point where we're taking questions, feel free to unmute your mic and actually talk. You don't have to stick to using chat. So that's the housekeeping. If there's any questions about any of the things that I've mentioned in that, please feel free to speak up. Put it in chat, but I am going to move on now to the CloseReach news part of the agenda. Then I'll be handing things over to Denise. All right, CloseReach news. So the EA solution contract, which many of our Government of Canada clients use for QualiWare, to purchase QualiWare software, pay for their annual maintenance and support, and to hire professional services, consultants, or training, has been renewed. It has been renewed for 1 year, plus an option year, with the same terms and conditions. So thank you, a big thank you to the team from CBSA and ESDC for all of your hard work when it came to that contract. It was quite a journey, and it went through, we had some ups and downs. but we did actually manage to get it renewed for another year plus an option year. I would like to comment on the process that we went through a little bit, though, and ask that everyone continue to push PSPC procurement and Treasury Board at higher levels to recognize that QualiWare is a big part of your organizations. We are not out of the woods yet. 2 years from now, when this contract really and truly does expire, we don't want to be back in the same boat that we were in this year. And it takes a lot of work. So, you know, if they still want to go through with the RFP process, that takes a long time. And, you know, we don't want to come to May of 2025 and find that, you know, we're still facing the same challenges. So we would really like to see that the 10-year contract, which was the original intention, a 5-year contract with 5 option years, gets awarded. Even if they decide that they want to go out to RFP, we would really like to see that contract from the initial proposal and discussions get awarded. It will give you guys some certainty on what's going on. And, you know, it will, like I said, it will avoid us in 2 years from now kind of being back in the same position. We look at this at CloseReach as being through the first hurdle, the fact that we got a 1-year extension and a plus an option year. We just don't want to have to, you know, go through all of this again. So we need to push at higher levels within PSPC and Treasury Board, and that really can only come from a certain level within the various government departments who use this contract. So directors, executive directors, ADMs really need to get involved and pushing it. So thank you for listening to that update. Any questions about that before I move on? Okay. Kevin and Carol are on a road trip. They have traveled, they're in the process of traveling to Denmark. There is a business conference for Northern Europe taking place this week in Copenhagen, and CloseReach was invited to attend as a QualiWare partner. And so Kevin will actually be hopping on a plane anytime soon, and Carol will be going as well, and they will be in Denmark for the week. They will be meeting with QualiWare at the end of the week on Friday with QualiWare's management team to discuss outstanding items. Pardon me. So if there's anything specific that you have burning platform that has not already been raised to us as an issue, please feel free to reach out to me during the week to let me know. I'm preparing everything for Kevin. So he has it for Thursday. So tomorrow, Wednesday, please let me know if there's anything that you want them to raise. Send that along to me. For the June meeting, last year we actually stopped after the May QualiWare user group meeting, and we didn't have anything in the summer. But we thought this year it would be fun to actually have an open house in June. So at the end of June, we will have an open house at our CloseReach offices. We've never really had I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? When you move into a new house, we've never really had an open house celebration. So we'll host everybody there for the QualiWare user group meeting in June. In that meeting, we hope to have an update on the status of QualiWare 10.9, which we are expecting out in the summer. No specific date as of yet, but hopefully by the time we come around to the user group meeting for June, there will be some further news on that, and maybe somebody from QualiWare to actually meet with us and provide some status updates. Last thing on my news item is a training update. We have, with Cheryl's help, I believe everybody met Cheryl on a previous user group meeting. Cheryl has been talking to Roger Burleton today, and we have an in-person business architecture training course scheduled for September 12th through the 14th. We will be reaching out to everybody in the next few days to gauge interest and get some registrations. There's a minimum registration required for this course of 10 people, 20 maximum. So we'll need to get numbers firmed up fairly quickly. We do have some people on our waiting list from the last time, but we are going to try and run that in September 12th to the 14th. We have a new course that's in development. It's a web modeler course suitable for Plus users, people who are doing modeling in the tool. We're looking at a September launch for that course. So look over the summer for additional information about that. And also at a previous user group meeting, we talked about training roadmap and streams that we were developing. We're looking at bringing in some special pricing for the streams, and there will be more information about that probably available in our June meeting. So the agenda for June will be out in another couple of weeks with details of, you know, when the meeting is going to be, where we're located, and all that kind of stuff. So look for that. Any questions about anything that I have mentioned in our CloseReach news? Someone's raised their hand. Carol, what can I do for you?
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. I hope you're having a beautiful day.
Thank you.
As you know, in the government, when we need to book our training, it takes a long time to go to finance approvals for, there's a whole process around booking for training. And I would like to know if you can share with us a bit of an outline of what that web modeler course would be, so that we can maybe, because I know how to model already on the web, so I wouldn't want to take a course of things that I already know. But is this something you would be able to share with us? What kind of course that would be? What exactly are they going to cover?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as we've got the syllabus ready, we can definitely share that. It's going to be targeted towards people who are doing modeling on the web, as the course name says, rather than in QLM. And so it's targeted for using the web exclusively, not doing it in QLM, and on to Plus users. So people who have that different license type that only allows them to do to use the web. So as soon as the syllabus is ready, we will definitely be able to send that out. Good question. Thank you. Thanks.
And I just wanted to tell you as well, I did a proof of concept here at ESDC in order to evaluate the web modeling tool, and we came across some pretty fundamental problems with it, such as unable to name a note. And it's pretty fundamental. So we create our notes in the QLM, and then we continue our modeling into the web. So I don't know if those will be addressed, those bugs, if they will be addressed at some point in time.
I'm not sure, Carol. Thank you for raising that. This isn't really the forum to get into that discussion about the limitations of the web modeling tool. But definitely, we can follow that up offline. I don't know the status of specific items. I know that there were a number of departments that raised things, so we can certainly take that as an offside.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Okay,
thank you. Okay, so I'm going to turn my camera off because you don't need to be looking at me while Denise is talking. And I'm going to pass things over to Denise.
For those of you that I haven't had the pleasure to meet yet, my name is Denise Boisvert, and I'm a consultant through CloseReach. I'm currently on a contract at SSC, but I've done some work in the past for a long time at CBSA. I've also been at D&D and CFIA and TBS and PSPC and a whole lot of other places. So I've also done some work in the private sector, but I've been involved with QualiWare and the deployment of QualiWare, training for QualiWare, and course development for QualiWare since I think 2009. So I'm going to let you do the math on that. It's been quite a few years. The presentation that I have today is it's not rocket science. It's nothing spectacular, but it's a summary of what we went through to implement QualiWare in French. So what our strategy was about. So I'm going to be going through a few things today, and I'm just going to see if I can get there you go. And I'm going to try something new. Apparently you can, there it is, my pointer. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is ACE at Shared Services, what our strategy was to move forward, how we actually implemented the strategy that we had developed. Lots of lessons learned along the way, things that things that are helpful, things that we may have wanted to do a little bit differently. If hindsight is 2020. We certainly had a few issues, several of which have been discussed here in the past, and they've been. And we'll go through those. One of the questions that I get a lot, and I even got it from one of my colleagues yesterday, is what was your timeline like to do this? How many people were working on it, and what kind of metrics? How big in terms of scale was your translation effort? We'll talk a little bit about next steps, and that translation is not something you do once. It becomes an ongoing activity. So what is ACE? ACE is the Architecture Collaboration Environment. It's essentially it's our implementation of QualiWare at SSC, and we've chosen to call it ACE. At CBSA, for instance, it's called ACP, I think, Barry, and different departments have branded. Sorry?
I was just saying, yep, concurring.
Okay, good. So it's just a branding that we use. So it's helpful in specifying that this is shared services centralized repository. Why did we do this? Most of you are from other government departments, and you know that bilingualism is not. It's a requirement, it's policy, and that's our implementation of that policy. The strategy was interesting because when you're looking at bilingualism in QualiWare, there's three big aspects. So there's the tool interface, and the tool interface is everything when you think of working in French. So all of the menu, the built-in menu, the icons, everything that you when you're on the thick client in QLM, that everything that you see. Then there's the web interface, which is what you publish using QEP, QualiWare Enterprise Publisher, and then there's the user content, the actual instances of the templates that people put into the tool. So if you have a diagram, an organization diagram in English, you want to create the same organization diagram in French. And when we looked at the strategy, we looked at, yes, it's a policy, it's something we need to do, but we know that QualiWare is moving to an all-web interface in the near medium time frame. And doing the tool interface in French it's a fairly significant effort, and it's not in the scope of our strategy. We did not implement the tool interface itself in French because I guess the discussion was around, should we invest that money and effort and time into something that's going to be essentially going away? So that's not part of the strategy that we had. We talked about the web interface, and there is a plan moving forward to provide all SSC users with web licenses. So anybody in the agency could come in, have a look at some architecture artifacts. So we thought, that's a great place to start. And it's also, eventually everything will be on the web. So the main thrust of our strategy is to provide a fully bilingual web interface for ACE. As for user content, ACE users themselves are responsible for the translation activities for their content. So we have tools to facilitate content translation, such as the Translation Accelerator, but it's up to them to determine whether they're going to do it and it's because it's their content to decide when they're going to do it, and also to some people may just want to continue doing what they do in one language or the other. The ACE team is responsible for the content that is authored and developed by the ACE team for the consumption of the entire ACE user population. But we're not going to be looking at individual, if you have a group that's doing a bunch of service diagrams, well, they're responsible for making sure that their content is in both official languages. Are there any questions on the strategy or no? Okay. So very simple approach: plan, execute, release, repeat, and I'll just go at a high level in terms of what activities we did when as part of each of those 3 phases. The plan is the planning activities are very, very important because it lets you get a sense of what the scope is. It lets you decide, how to break things up. It also lets you organize, if you have multiple people on the team that are doing different things. It really helps. You can't do it without planning because there's just so much content, and you'll see at the end of the presentation what I mean. So what we did is I spent a couple of days inventorying, going through the web and saying, okay, well, if we do this, we have all these menu options, we have these, we have those diagrams, this content. So I just started putting it all in a spreadsheet, started prioritizing, determining the order in which they're going to be done. Are we going to do top down, menu by menu, tab by tab, or desktop by desktop? So I think we would have been really lost if we didn't have that anchor point to make sure that we were on track, and especially to make sure that nothing is missed, because trust me, it's very easy to miss certain things. We split our release effort into 2 phases. One phase would have been too much to do in one go, so we had 2 phases. The first phase, we did all of the structural top-level elements, so the menu items, the desktops, the tiles, and we essentially put everything in place so that the top level of the interface was available in both official languages. Then we went in and did the rest of the work, the heavy lifting of doing the underlying content that we had to translate. We assigned a resource within the team. We were very, very lucky because I'm bilingual, and the 2 wonderful teammates that I had are also bilingual. Yay, Lise and Jose.
Denise, there's a question.
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Denise. It's Carol. So nice to see you, by the way. It's been a while.
Yeah.
So in other words, you guys have basically did the translation for the web interface,
Yep.
menus and things like that. So
Yep.
do you think that it's something that could be shared with other departments? I know there's a lot of customized web stuff that people are doing on their own, but is there a baseline of things that we could share among each other?
There is, but before we did the translation, we also did a refactoring exercise. So we took what was out of the box, because we hadn't really focused on the web before last year, and we looked at what comes out of the box, and then we adjusted that to meet our own needs. So yes, could we share certain things? I can talk about a few things that would be good to share. But it also depends on, in a lot of cases, translation is fairly straightforward. But in some cases, as a department, we made a choice on using, this word to mean variance in French, because there's 4 different options. So
Yeah. Okay.
I'll let you talk to Zara Abdul Mohammed, who's also on this call. If you want to contact her, she would be the one that you would set that up through.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So like I said, the resources were bilingual, and yes, it's, when you're doing actual translation activity, you can have people who are not bilingual help you out, but it makes things a lot more difficult, and it not being fluent in the language means there's things likely to be missed. So we had one person who was focusing on getting the translation done. This person was not on our network, so she essentially did the filling out of the translation accelerator, the research, keeping up our lexicon, which I'll talk about in a minute, and our other resource. We had split up the work so that, for example, she handled everything to do with reports, and several other aspects along the way as well. So it really was a team effort. But again, you need the plan. If you don't know what you're having to do, it's hard to split it up. We also had to adjust the plan as needed. A few times we hit a few issues that caused us to be a little later than we thought, but we still, at the end of the day, ended completing at the end of the quarter, which was what we had promised to do. So that's where we were. But we did adjust the plan as we went through. And we followed the plan. We updated the plan. It's so I can't state it enough. And I'm going to get off my little soapbox in a minute. But if you don't know what you need to do, it's very, very easy to get lost. Execute. One of the first things we did using Teams and a spreadsheet is we created a lexicon of terms that we had established. So if you're, the term repository, do you use répertoire or référentiel? So we made some choices, and we also used all our communications, release emails, presentations, etc., certain other bits of content were already translated. So we built our lexicon, and we using those things, and we included sources for the translation. So how did you come up with the term, the French term for variance? Well, we have a source. We looked at other existing collateral on the Government of Canada website. We called team meetings when certain things were difficult or not obvious to translate. We had a few of those where we said, okay, we have 4 choices for the French equivalent for a variance. So we hashed it out. We looked up some, everybody had contributed their opinion or their preference and their evidence, and then we ended up choosing one. We used the translation accelerator where it was applicable. When we had large amounts of data that was easy to load. We did run into a few issues, and I'll talk about those a little later, but those issues have been addressed. That being said, Translation Accelerator does a fantastic job at speeding things up. I know of what I speak because when I did a website from QualiWare at CBSA many years ago, I was painfully responsible for making sure that 1,200 terms had been translated, and it was no fun. So I was very, very glad when it got developed. But sometimes if you only have 2 or 3 things to do, you do a manual input. It's faster and less risky. So things like, category objects or pick list items that can be done rather quickly. Our release, we use QRX files, and EXP files don't carry the language variants. So that's a little thing that may not be obvious to some. And we used a 3 repository model to do what we did. So the 2 green ones here are in pre-prod. So in the first repository, we captured the translations and we created the export files. We then did a QA of the translation and made sure that the QRX files are doing the right thing when testing. We actually tested that the QRX files were appropriate and worked properly, so that when we moved the QRX files in prod, we were confident that they were bringing over what they should and not more than that. Because as you know, if you're not careful doing an export file, you may bring along way more than you expect. All right, so lessons learned. There was a few. So most of these just make sense. Common sense. Make sure the content is stable as possible before you translate it. get the actual translation activities started as soon as possible. So if you have, if you know that next week the plan says you're going to be, capturing all of the service SSC service portfolio, well then you send it to translation, or you assign it to a translator the week before or the week before that. You always try to keep that that lag time required for actual translation, so that when you're ready to pick up the work and go, that it's done. If you can, keep the same translator. It's not always possible, but if you can, when you're sending requests for translation, we would send along our lexicon and say, hey, this is what we've got so far. They may come back with different options for words, but for the most part, they will appreciate the fact that you've got a lexicon. Always double check the translator XML files before uploading them. There's often, even one or two mistake can make everything, out of sync. It's very important to make sure that everything is there and that it's actually translated, and that, the English column matches the French column. It's common sense, but if you forget to do it and there's an error, then it takes a while to back out of these things. This is an important bit. There's the way that the translation accelerator is implemented. You're not supposed to put anything in the rightmost columns. If you do, or if you do formatting or whatever, that can really, really mess up your translation accelerator. When you're bringing all the content back in. So make sure that people are quite aware of that. Once you create a language variant of a diagram, you now have two diagrams to govern. So, and those are two, you have to approve and review the English, and then you have to review and approve the French. And it makes sense. They're the same thing, but you want to make sure that the naming is done correctly and that they reflect the same thing. So also, because of a characteristic, shall I say, of QualiWare, the English being the main language, the default language, you should always govern the English version first. If you don't, by the time if you govern the French first, it kind of doesn't know what to link to, so it causes some issues. Make sure you adjust the development and testing processes moving forward to include the time and activities required for bilingualism. I'm going to talk about that in more detail at the end. But when you do translation, you do the initial set of translation, but then it becomes part of your development and release process. You have to keep including it in your testing schedules, your test cases, your development plan. Everything needs to consider bilingualism moving forward. Translation Accelerator is great, but if you use it on a frequent basis, that works fine. But what we're finding is that users need that support and need help for doing that, because if they're bringing in a whole pile of data and they make a mistake, like I said, it's difficult to back out of. So our plan is to keep supporting users and to provide. We have the information from CloseReach, and we're using that to relay that to people on how the accelerator works. But wait, there's more. One of the things that I did pretty much everywhere where I could is that I use naming conventions. So if the object name is not displayed, for example, if you have a tile that's called benefit register in English, in French I called it FR benefit register. And it makes it easier to, if you have to compare the two, if you have to make sure that it was done, or it just makes it so much simpler, to be able to replicate, to be able to make sure that you've got the same elements, in the same spot. When you're using QRVs or query result views, If you're calling a QRV from a menu, then the name of the QRV itself is displayed, so you can't use that. But if a QRV is called from a tab, an HTML content tab, this is going into a bit of detail, but you can use the FR because the name is never displayed. And another point, especially dealing with QRVs, is that wherever it makes sense, we had, I don't know how many dozens of QRVs, but several of them were very similar, so we standardized our display columns. So what you could do after that is you could, because you can't use the translation accelerator for those, you just do a copy paste from one to the other, and it works really well. Some issues that came along the way, the revision synchronization issue, I think, was possibly the worst. I think we talked about this in a previous meeting, where QLM loses track of what the default revision. So if you're on an English object and you're on revision 4, the default revision should be revision 4. But when you create the French language variant, if you're in a private workspace, it doesn't know what the default is, and it can assign at random any one of the previous or older versions. So you're using an older version of the data and the content. So that makes it, we went through that on a large scale, and it's a good thing that we did that we had 3 repositories to test from, because we could have gotten into a lot of trouble if we did it in prod first. So this is a known issue that's been raised with CloseReach and QualiWare. There's 2 ways you can get around it. You can either do all of your modeling in the base configuration, but not too many people do that. My understanding is that a fix has been applied in the translation accelerator latest revision, which is still being tested at SSC, but should be available to the rest of the CloseReach customers shortly, I guess. We're using version 10.3, and the automatic synchronization of links between language variants wasn't working. So we had somebody create a patch, and now it works automatically in both ways. So what I mean is, if I'm on an English language and I have a link to a given object, let's say the GC WAN service as a linked object, if I wanted the same to apply to the French equivalent, I had to click on Update Variant in order to update that link. So now the way it works is the way it was intended to. Any of the data that are links, if you change them in one language, it will be reflected in the other, and vice versa. I'm not sure if a ticket was raised for this to CloseReach. If anybody knows, if you could let us know. But if not, it probably should. Or maybe it's already been addressed in 10.8, I don't know. And last but not least, QualiWare has implemented, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, the LL statements in the QualiWare code, and it knows then to go pick up built-in translations and that are specified in your miscellaneous labels in your repository, in your publisher, sorry. But there are places where they have integrated software, and I think there are 5 or 6 instances where either the LL statements were missing altogether, so we couldn't provide the French equivalent, or the French translations that are in there are spelled incorrectly. So, anything that's had the word filter came out as, in French, as filter and not filtre. So, this is, we've written a document, it's been sent to CloseReach, and there is a ticket that was raised to fix this. Timeline resources, so we had 1 full-time bilingual resource, that would be me. 2 part-time bilingual resources, which were just amazing, and we got everything done in time. I still can't believe we got everything done. It was awesome. We started in December and completed the work by the end of March. And time and effort really depends on how much content you have and what issues you hit along the way. So How much content was an ace? Quite a bit. So these are all high-level numbers provided for scale. So the publisher, the menu, 23 menu items, 9 desktops, 65 tiles, all of which pretty much have text on them, 84 content tabs, 50 QRVs, and in the QRVs we also have in the describe attribute text that we use when we generate an index. So that turned out to be quite a bit of work. 34 template definitions, 8 dialogue layouts, 137 miscellaneous labels in the publisher. So those are the things that get picked up in the LL by the LL function to display the French versus the English. Other objects, we had 11 guidance diagrams. So for each of our prescribed diagrams, we have a guidance diagram, which has a whole bunch of text. Each of the objects on the diagram has descriptions and underlying text. That was a lot of work. That was really a lot of work. 3 governance diagrams, including all the states, email notifications, transitions, et cetera, that goes with it. That too took quite a while. We have help items that we've translated for doing our frequently asked questions on the web. 2 reports. That includes 25 sub-reports. So that was also a labor of love. Almost 100 pick list values, diagrams, standard roles. And we make, like I said before, any content that is maintained by the ACOE or modeled by the ACOE needs to be in both official languages. So we have the departmental report framework, 71 objects in there, 55 in the strategy, and we have a BCM with 365 capabilities in it, the business capability model. That took a while, and our service portfolio is made up of 343 objects. So put all that together, make sure there's no typos, make sure the actual QEP works, make sure it gets done, make sure it gets carried over from one environment to the next. It was quite a bit of work. Next steps. Now that we've completed the translation of the web interface, we want to provide more information to people in terms of when you model in English first, how do you deal with creating the language variants after? But we've also gotten some people who want to model in French first. How do we do that? We're currently looking at a few different scenarios of how we would do that. Either putting the English in the French, putting the French in the English and getting it to a point where you're happy with it, and then firing it off to the French, creating the French variants from that, and then going back and putting in the English translation. There's still a lot of kinks to work out with that approach, I think. And then the other approach is if you do model in French first, it doesn't work the same way as when you have an English object and you create a language variant, it carries over the name, it carries over all the links and everything else. But when you create the French object first and then create the variant, you don't need to create the variant because under the covers, it creates the English version with the new object. It doesn't carry over the name. It doesn't carry over some of the text, and I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but there are issues with going from French to English. So we're looking into all that, and we're making headway into how we're going to approach this with users, because we have several groups that are interested in modeling in both languages. Most importantly, like I said before, don't forget this is an ongoing activity. It's like doing architecture, you're never done. So there's ongoing user support. Anytime you make any change to the web interface, it's got to be applied in both languages. Any code that you develop in QCL or whatever, in our case, for example, we have a function that automatically generates a header note on a new diagram. Well, we had to create the French equivalent of that so that it shows up properly on the web. Any changes to governance workflow, you have to implement them and test them in both official languages, reports. Oh, sorry about that. Catalog development, pick list items, and last but not least, testing for all of the above. Your testing activities just doubled. Not quite, but almost. So you have to take that into consideration. And I think I'm done. Any questions? I get paid by the question. I
We
always
have
have to say that.
We have a hand up. Rick, you have a question.
Hi, Rick.
Right.
So let me start by saying thank you very much, Denise, for this excellent presentation. It's really a lot of good material in there that's going to be really helpful to many people.
I paid him to say that.
My question is what kind of engagement, if any, did you have with the Translation Bureau during your tasks here?
We have an in-house translation group that we send things to at SSC. We had a lot of the content, so we looked at what was done at D&D in terms of their translation efforts. So they shared their fr.xml file, if that means anything, so that we could have a start. We used all of the work we did because every time we do a release, we send out a release email. And of course, we state everything in English and in French in the release email. So we did have quite a bit of existing collateral. Our SSC service portfolio catalog is completely, but it comes out, the group that manages it publishes it once a month in both languages. So we did have quite a bit of stuff. I don't think we did that many requests to them. The hard work was just assembling the translation. Much of the hard work was assembling the translation accelerator and actually testing it and releasing it.
Okay, yeah. My question is really about the reusability. If your translators are, whether or not they're using the Bureau's tools, like we want to make sure that stuff gets into Termium, for example, and I think that's important. And maybe your translation team is already doing that.
We did the best we could using existing, like I said, existing blessed approved content and other materials that we've had translated in the past. I think it's not everything went through official translation, but I think we're quite happy with the way it looks at the minute. So
it's great work. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Walter, you've got your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I am an SSC employee. I'm in the process of creating many QualiWare architectural views, diagrams, models, whatever you want to call them. Mm-hmm. And when should I start translating them? And how long is it going to take to translate, let's say, 10 views with 20 objects in each view?
So it depends what you're using, what kind of objects you're using. So if you're using anything from the SSC service portfolio, any of the services or segments, for example, those are all translated. Capabilities are all translated. It really depends on the content that you're using. We'd have to maybe set up a quick meeting to chat about that. Feel free to reach out on Teams or through my calendar, and we can have a look at what you have and work on that.
Thank you very much. I will reach out after I've at least done most of the work so that I've got it done in English to start with and then only translate to French.
What kind of diagrams do you work with mostly?
Oh, well, all the solution architecture diagrams and all the service architecture diagrams. So the strategy diagram, the roadmap diagram,
Perfect.
The logical diagram, the solution architecture, the technology architecture diagrams. As you can see, it's a lot of stuff.
Well,
Yeah,
we're there to help. So
we'll leave
if you,
we'll leave that to you to reach out to Denise through the shared services channels.
yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I'll
Thanks.
involve Zara, our team manager.
Oh,
Great
thank
question.
you very
Great.
much.
Thank you. Thank you. Adam, you have your hands up. One hand, not hands.
Hey, Adam.
How's it going? It's great work.
Good, you?
Man. It's great work. Glad you're joining the bilingualism effort. I felt like D&D was alone for a little bit, but I guess my question is I saw you only have 8 diagram layouts translated, so I guess that means that your users aren't entering data for very many objects from the web yet.
No, not yet. We're working on that. Well, we're working on that.
Timeline for that?
The need hasn't arisen all that much so far, but we expect that it will increase over time. Yes, there are several initiatives underway that are looking at doing something like that.
Okay, so you guys are coming up with a plan to figure out how you're going to do that. I mean, do you have something?
We had 8 so far, but as new releases come in and we develop things, we translate as we go. So those will be done on an ongoing basis.
Okay.
It wasn't that we only translated 8. We only had 8 to translate.
Oh, okay. So, but I
There you
mean,
go.
like at D&D, we just have so many object types. So, like a business function, an activity, an actor, all these different objects, and
Yeah,
so-
8 dialogue layouts. Barry and I were talking about that earlier this week.
So
Good question.
very excited to
Yeah,
hear
I
what
was
your
teasing
solution
her.
is for that.
I was teasing her. I said all the numbers sound impressive, but when you look at 8 dialogue layouts, it sounds low.
Well,
Okay. All right.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Okay. Thanks, Adam. Samuel, you have your hand up.
Yeah. First of all, tremendous work, Denise. It's very nice. It's part of a lot of our talk here at CBSA. Now, the concern would be, and I think Hong was saying the same thing as I was saying, but in another word, but is to make sure that both the French and English version are in sync. So if someone edits something in English, how can we know that the French needs to be edited? Is there a way that you thought that, except of course telling the users to edit both at the same time, but is there a way that you found that
yes.
Okay.
So one of the tests that I always did after I'd carried over some content that was translated is I used a translation accelerator a second time. So let's say I have a diagram with like 15 objects on it. I would create the translation accelerator, and it uses the existing French and English versions of the text or that it has. So you compare left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. As long as you have somebody who can read both English and French, they can do the comparison and make sure that it's the same.
Okay.
Now,
so an assigned person needs to
yes.
check if they're
Now
both.
we did find that issue was a problem with the automatic synchronization between the English and the French, but now that we have a patch to fix that, it's if you change it in English, it gets reflected in the French. Change it in the French, it gets reflected in the English. So the one thing it didn't do, which I thought was a bit strange, but I expected, I guess, dates to be one of those things that would get carried over, but they didn't. So it's a bit interesting, but
Okay.
something to keep in mind.
It's a good to know. Yep. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Samuel. Appreciate it. Okay. Thank you,
I'm
Denise.
over my time, Cecile. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you so much for this presentation. Obviously sparked a lot of questions, and I'm sure it'll be a topic that we're continuing to discuss over the next little while. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I have our next presenter, who is in his yellow shirt, not his green shirt that I thought of. You had to be here at the very beginning of the meeting to understand that joke. So this is Mike Haley, everybody. And Mike is going to talk to us about how to improve financial management in the public sector with QualiWare and discuss a little bit of the work that he's been doing over the past while with some of our public sector clients. So I will give the baton to Mike and let you get going. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go, for those of you who heard me before, you probably thought I talked fast then. You'll hear it even faster now. Maybe that's a good thing for some of you, but we are going to be talking about how to use a specific application within QualiWare that has been built and designed for improved productivity and financial management. And I purposely underline and because you get both. It's not either or, it comes together. So a little bit about us. So I head up a company called Landmark Decisions based here in Halifax. I'm actually in a new office here because I've been evacuated from my home. Anyways, hopefully, fingers crossed, the wind doesn't change and all will be well. But what we focus on is really on business management with regard to costing, analytics, workload management, performance management. We do a lot of training with CPA Canada. That's our kind of our financial background. And we work very closely with a lot of consulting partners. And through our association with CloseReach many years ago, we were introduced to another Boisvert. In fact, Denise's big brother, Bob. Many of you, I'm sure, know Bob. And we talked with Bob about some of the techniques that we use in our practice, and like any good QualiWare person, they say, yeah, QualiWare can do that. So we're here to show you that QualiWare can indeed do that with an application we call collaborative business planning. And the other part of our three-legged stool in the CBT team is certainly CloseReach. They are actually now an implementation partner, so they've accomplished quite a bit with a few of their consultants and actually can implement CBP now. They also do the hosting for the application presently. And they hold the salsa for any federal organization that wishes to add CBP into their business stack, as it were. So CBP is built around a methodology we call BPAC, and it's really at a very high level work around process optimization. So if you're familiar with concepts around lean, we include that. We basically do process modeling. And that's a bit different probably than most of you are familiar with when you say process modeling or process mapping. It does have some similar elements, but this is very data intensive, and it has algorithms to do calculations. So that's certainly putting QualiWare, I'll say, outside its comfort zone. So that's kind of the secret sauce of what's been developed with CBP. As a result of that, we can get into looking at things like resource optimization, utilizations, how resources are being deployed, and then ultimately, what is the cost of those resources, which can help us with understanding the costs for programs and services, for service fees, for operational budgeting, and so on. So we say BPAC kind of sits at the intersection of these three components. And then the CBP solution itself, which I'll show you through demos with some of the clients we've done work with, include value stream mapping, what we call activity-based planning, and integrated operational modeling. And I'll probably easier just to show you through that. Before we did that, I thought I'd just at a very high level, and this is going to be very quick. So I know some of you have seen it before in presentation I've done and other user group sessions. But just to get a level set, particularly for some of the new people, value stream mapping, first of all, methodology is certainly nothing that Landmark concocted on its total own. We've adapted it from some well-published work. This is the Consortium for Advanced Management. We're members with that consortium. It's a US-based research organization, and they talk about activity-based planning and budgeting. So we've taken some of those concepts and we've adapted it, worked with some of our Lean Six Sigma practitioners to bring in some other components that support activity-based planning. So we always start with value stream mapping, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with that, basically where you map the process and the process steps and the activities that take place to give you kind of total lead time, time to serve, and probably more importantly, the identification of non-value added activities so you can look at optimizing the business process. Step 2 is really taking that value stream map and looking at activity-based planning concepts by where we look at what are the program and or client requirements that truly drive that process. So in this case, this is actually an example from Health Canada from many years ago, actually, where they do inspections and assessments of drug products, for example, and these would be the activities that take place in the processes to support inspections and assessments. We also then look at the resource requirements for each of those activities. In this case, we have a field team, i.e. a labor workforce. We have some specialized equipment. They're housed in a building. They use some contractors and so on. So we capture fixed and variable resources quite differently. And in each of these fixed resources, we also identify what is the capacity, how much labor time is available within a certain time period of the model, how much, and equipment hours, how much physical square foot do we have in the facility to house the people in the equipment and so on. So in that case, we call this being constraint-based modeling. And that becomes important when we do the calculations, because what we do is we actually, and this is where the algorithms come in, we'll know how many inspections, how many assessments will tell us how much work needs to be done and who's doing the work, such that we can determine the utilization of these different resources. And we understand the deployment of those resources as well. So that gets at what we call our capacity or capability to serve. Then we can load in financials. Basically, dollars in any organization are assigned to resources. How those resources are used ultimately dictates the costs and the budgets by what the program or the services or the products, whatever, are delivered. So we map from the GL to the resource structure, and then we pull those dollars back down through the model because we've already established the relationships in the operational sense from the bottom up. And then that gets us things like the cost per activity, the cost per output, the cost per program, or the cost per client. So we call that the cost to serve. And in this case, then we can use this model once it's been fully validated for operational budgeting. So if you're going to change next period, next year, whatever the number of inspections, the number of assessments, the model will actually predictably tell you how much workforce you will need, more or less, how many pieces of equipment, how much space, how many contractors, and so on. So this is the planning aspect of activity-based planning. So that's what you're going to see. You're going to see some components of this as we go from different model to different model. So thought that little backgrounder would hopefully be helpful. So what I'd like to show today is some work we've done with CBP at Nova Scotia Crown Lending. They are the provincial agency responsible for supporting the farming, fishing, and timber industry here in Nova Scotia by providing loans, probably higher risk loans than commercial banks may necessarily want to get involved in. This work actually was presented at the Financial Management Institute annual conference in Ottawa. And if you'd like to see a little bit more detail, or hear the CEO from Nova Scotia Crown Lending present some of the results and observations from that work, there is a link there you can go to, and if you do have the materials that'll be provided, you can just click on that link as well. So Nova Scotia Crown Lending, fairly small organization. Their interest was really focused on lead time reduction. There was a significant amount of time to process loans, and obviously that has a financial burden on their client base. Also interested in looking at operational budgeting And last but not least, they were also concerned about how to handle what they hoped to be new volume in the services that they were offering. So let's just jump into CDP, and I'll show you some of the things that were accomplished with that solution. As was said earlier in the presentation, we normally start by doing a value stream map, which identifies the flows, the key activities, and some of the processing times associated with any business process. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with swim lane diagrams. So in this case, we laid the value stream map out in a swim lane. So each swim lane would be a different role. So the loan admin team, the loan officers, the professional inspectors, the risk managers, and so on. And then the activities for each, and as they kind of go through the loan application process. Some of the metrics that we collect, the variables, are the processing time. So this is 1.75 hours to actually take the whole application by the admin team, review it, enter it into the systems, and so on. And then the percent complete and accurate, which is an indication of how often that's done 100% correctly. So for example, in preparing loan summaries, they take basically about a full day, and only about 90% of the time do they have all the information necessary to do that whole flow. So if I zoom out, I'll go and show you the Shift Z, so you get a full feel for the whole diagram. Basically, we can track all of the process through all of those specific roles. And one of the really cool things that we have with the value stream mapping, the algorithm that is, when we calculate this model, and we basically can create what's called a dynamic timeline here on the bottom. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit further. I'll come back into that. So now if I go in and go back up to the top, we can actually see the lead times and the wait times associated with each component, and also the staffing requirements based on the staff capacity and the staff FTE levels. And if I go down to the bottom here, you'll start to see some of that familiar value stream timeline. And if I go over to the end here, and let me just zoom in on that a little bit for you, we actually get some lean metrics of total lead time, total processing time, the value added ratio, which is really the processing time divided by the lead time, which in this case is very low, and then the rolled through yield, which would be an indication of throughout the whole process, what percentage of the time is the process done totally complete, right from stem to stern and things like that. Again, a very low number. And these are metrics that you want to look at optimizing as you improve the business process. What's interesting then is now that we have the flow and we've identified some of those key activities, we can actually go and develop the activity-based planning model. So I'm going to jump to that. Don't be intimidated here by all these the symbols. I'll just walk you through quickly. So this is really the organizational structure. So we have the CEO. For every role defined here, we have what's called regular time and the provision for overtime, be that paid or unpaid overtime. Collectively, that gives them the total time, and then the total time is where they invest their time in the business process. So you'll see there's these purple little circles with a little acronym here that says CEO total time. So anywhere you see that later in the model means the CEO gets involved in that activity. Similarly for the credit manager or a loan officer, what have you. So we can see the direct reporting relationships with the three managers, credit, risk, and finance manager, reporting to the CEO as well as her executive assistant. And then we see the credit manager overseeing loan managers overseeing fisheries officers, and so on and so forth. As we move down to the actual activity layer in the model, we start to see each major activity that's performed by each role. So this is the loan admin team, so they do application intake, they take care of new loans for fisheries, they take care of new loans for farm, they manage current loan applications, and if I slide over, now we can see what the loan team does, what some of the things around new loans, current loans, and so on, and I go across vessel inspector. So each of these roles have defined key activities, and they have metrics along how long it takes each of those key activities to be performed. And if I go down to what we call the output page or our demand page, what's driving the work in the business process? It's really how many new loans, both for fisheries and farm, need to be processed within a time period. These models are always built over some time period. In this case, it's an annual time period. Quite often we'll do monthly. In some cases, we've done weekly planning, depending on how you want to and what you want to use the model for. Some of the other demands are managing the existing loans for both fish and farm, and then work done to promote Nova Scotia Crown Lending and its services. So when the model calculates, and actually calculates, you'll remember from the ABP diagram, from the bottom up. So if I hit the calculate button now, basically it said, okay, this year we did 68 farm loans, 170 fisheries loans. That drove up certain amount of work, certain number of meetings. And if I go back up to the activity level, say, how many documents had to be presented, how many client inquiries on average would be coming in to be managed, and then I go up to the labor page, this will tell us how well we're using our resources. So you can see they're pretty well maxed out. Most all of these resources, the home plates, which represent the fixed aspect, for each role, basically are yellow. We use some traffic lighting to signal when we get over certain thresholds. So in this case, they're all over 90%, and that was one of the key issues. You'll also notice there's a fair level of overtime being generated on an annual basis. This again was another concern the CEO had, because they were taxing the organization a little too heavily, and that was a bit of a liability that she wanted to get her hands around. So the model itself, if I calculate again now, what we're going to do is we're going to push the dollars back down. So if I look in any one, so let's just go into here, I can see here's where I would have my civil servant salary, my fringe benefits, my pension contributions, and any other financial item that would be associated with that. So it's basically a resource model from a staffing point of view. So now if I calculate the model, all of those dollars will flow down through the layers of resource and then ultimately down to the activities. At any point we can navigate, so I can go right click and I can navigate to see what the loan officers fisheries are doing. They basically handle basically the fully loaded and the general admin. So when I get there, I'm going to show you this is how we would net out any, I'll say, non-productive time or non-process time, handling emails, going to meetings, a lot of work that gets done without necessarily being directed towards your actual business process. So I go down to the next layer and we'll see that structure here. So this is where we capture the general admin and the fully loaded time. And it's really the fully loaded time because it's the total cost. That general admin has to be carried by that work that is done, and we can actually see the distribution of time. So if I open one of these up and I go to the links, I can actually see now how those links flow, how many hours and what percentage of the flow goes to each one of these activities. Similarly, I can see from the bottom up, and I can actually see how much time goes into each one of these, and then those costs get tabulated down. So basically, to do a loan commit for a fisheries document, they did 230 of those. Total cost about $91,000, and the individual cost close to $400 per loan. If I go back down to the outputs, basically this will now start to show me some of the cost for processing new loans, the total cost for processing and the unit cost. And this was quite a bit of a revelation that they recognized the cost of a new loan, about $3,600, compared to a farm loan, fish versus farm, $5,500, significantly more expensive, i.e. more time required to process farm loans. And a lot of that came from the application processing and the way they were doing application processing. So that identified opportunities for improvement. It also identified some of the subsidization that is taking place, because there is basically a fee for those loans, but they are a very small portion of the actual true cost. So that becomes important for budgeting and program funding purposes. As mentioned earlier, the CEO was very interested in looking back to how she could change the organization to be able to handle more farm loans. They knew they were constrained. They knew they were running too much overtime, taxing the staff too much. So she wanted to come forward with a business case to improve the business process and to be able to handle additional volume. As it would stand at this point in time, if they wanted to get back to, at one point, a few years before, they were basically processing 100 farm loans. So they wanted to say, what would be involved? Could we process 100 farm loans? So we can actually change the volume of the farm loans, and we can run that as a scenario. So if I calculate the model again, and it comes up and it tells me, hey, something's wrong. We don't have enough resource somewhere to be able to meet that demand requirement. So if I go back up to the top of the model, we can see actually there's quite a few resources we don't have, again, because we were running very close to the line. We now certainly don't have enough in the farm loan officer team and the managers, the credit and the risk manager to oversee those new loans, the loan admin team on the intake, and the finance team to deal with the setting up the loan provisions and so on in their SAP tracking system. So obviously decisions needed to be made on how they could do that. What was really interesting about having a visual model is they were basically able to sit. When I was involved in this, we actually sat with the management team, so these 4 individuals here in the boardroom, and kicked around ideas around how the business could be changed. And it was fascinating to see because let's say the credit manager would say, oh, I could take some of that. The risk manager is pretty heavily loaded. I could do that piece of the work. So we could make that change. We could say, hey, maybe you can't do it as efficiently. Maybe it's going to take you 2 hours versus an hour and a half. Let's see what the impact of that is. What that whole discussion, which literally was done in about 60 to 90 minutes, interactively using the model, was able to identify a new structure. So I'm just going to go to that new structure, and here's where they wound up in deciding. So again, we can use notations within QualiWare to keep track of all these changes. I've highlighted those by using some red coloring to indicate what happened. So what they did is they actually eliminated the 2 loan manager positions. They were due for retirement, so they just did not replace them. In their place, they hired an additional credit manager to handle some other responsibilities, taking some of the pressure off the risk manager, and also allowing time to increase the loan officer time to be able to handle that extra volume. One other area, the loan admin team had a very high utilization, and we're very stressed, and so there was an opportunity to take some of the front end work. So they actually created a new position called an intake clerk to deal with the applications, to kind of pre-screen the applications coming in, and allowing the loan admin team to spend more value-added time on the things that they needed to do to support the loan officers. So those were some of the key things that were done, and again, some of those involved making changes to unit times and so on, again, all done interactively until ultimately a scenario was developed. And then when the model was run, what they found was they could actually predict, i.e. develop an operational budget around how much they would need to ask for the upcoming year to make these changes. So it worked out to be about $250,000 higher from a budgetary process to make these changes, but that allowed them then to handle that higher volume of farm loans, which was a strategic direction they wanted to go. So overall, very insightful. All of this information, I should point out, can be exported, so there's some right-click functionality here. Again, we don't have time today to go into all of that, but I can actually export all of my results and all of the detail that we get. So if I went down and let me just show you one. Let's just look at these new farm loans. And if I go in and I look at the PMO contribution, oh, apologies, I'm going to have to change my setting here. Turn that on. Quickly recalculate my model. Bear with me a second. Calculate, And now let's have a look at this. I can actually see what's called the PMO, primary modeling object. So this will show me how much of each type of resource, be they variable resources or fixed resources, are flowing into the farm loan, what the actual cost is, and what percentage of that PMO winds up in that. So a lot of detail, a lot of resolution that comes through that particular model. And for the financially oriented, we can actually get a kind of an expense statement at any point in the model that shows all of the dollars that wind up going through that particular, wind up in this case in the demand, the final output of that. So again, all this information can be output, and then typically we'll work with Power BI and do analysis and management dashboards of that information. So by no means would you expect senior management to be involved in the modeling, developing the models, or even using the models, but the results from those models would be important for them to see, and that's where the dashboards actually come in. So if I go back to the presentation just to sum up that presentation, I think if I go to slide 12, thank you. Basically, these were the key benefits that were derived. First of all, to get the unit times, the workload distribution, the key activities was what we did. That was a workload analysis. So understanding what everybody did and how much time they were taking, that was very insightful in its own right. And then certainly creating these visual models that allowed them to collaborate and to optimize the business process as a group. That was really, really, really key. They could then identify where the big hitters of costs were and look at those as opportunities for optimization. This was done hand in hand with a lean black belt, where we were able to design lean experiments and actually test them out in the model prior to implementation. So it gave us an opportunity to prioritize many of the experiments that come out of lean Kaizen examples and so on, and also then gave them the capability to do future state planning. So that's kind of a little bit of one case study in the public sector that had both productivity, operational, and financial benefits from the work that was done. So really what CVP models do, we say it convert organizational data into actionable insights. So you take your business operating model, using the value stream and activity-based planning, you create this CVP model in QualiWare. Right now, CloseReach do the hosting. CVP is a cloud, standalone cloud offering. Available through Salsa to anybody in the federal. Obviously, we sell it in the private sector as well, and CloseReach support us on that. In future, this will be migrating to the Quali Cloud, probably later this calendar year, and we'll be working directly with, we are working directly with QualiWare on that as well as an application to add into the whole QualiWare stack. Basically, once that model structure is done, we pull in operational. I talked about the passport systems where we get operational data from, HR payroll, time tracking, Clarity, for example. I know PSPC use that a lot for their time tracking on projects and investments and so on. We tie into SAP, we load those financials into the resource structure, and then we get visualization of business processes. We get the costs, we get the understanding of the flows. We can do simulations, we can do planning, understand where the bottlenecks and constraints are, and then we can also deliver the information through dashboards. So you don't have to think that everybody's got to be a modeling expert to work hands-on with CVP. We can actually bring that information, the relevant information forward for those users. Just on the user landscape, yes, you're going to have an individual that understands how to build, create, and design these models. They look at where the data requirements are. Typically, they'll work with the process or program owners in putting those models together. They'll probably work with people that can supply the data, maybe people in the SAP team or people that run the operational systems to feed the models. To create these graphical kind of visual interfaces. And then the analysts can kind of run the simulations, can help with the planning, the forecasting, and so on. And then our managers and executives can consume this information through the dashboards, provide their feedback to guide different types of scenarios that may want to be run, or different changes in the model that need to be incorporated going forward. So it becomes kind of a living, breathing thing. You maintain it as your business changes. So I think that's it. Leave that up in case anybody does have any questions. I know we're getting very short on time here, so I could take a few questions now, or by all means, feel free to reach out at any time with any further questions you might have. Cecile, anything?
We have questions.
Questions, go.
Hi, Mike. Nice presentation, Samuel from CBSA. I've got my only question is, do you plan to have a web interface integration? We know that QLM will eventually vanish, so are you working on moving things to the web interface?
I guess we'll have to take that new course that CloseReach is offering, right? Yes, we are. We are actually working with QualiWare on how that would be deployed. We're also in discussions with them about how we can incorporate this into kind of, I'll say, the standard meta model, as I'm sure many of you know better than I. Their transition to the web modeling with different templates has been, let's just say, slow and steady. So getting this adopted, and there may be some synergies in the direction their roadmap with where we want to go with our business users. You probably all recognize this is kind of a unique application of QualiWare. It's really designed for business owners, business users per se. Not that the core QualiWare and the work that you all do in making that accessible to your business users, but because of the high level of data, and it certainly needs a lot more players. But to answer your question specifically, yes, that's kind of on the development path for sure.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Walter, you have your hand up.
Yes, I have a quick question about how do you handle the different quality of people? Like there, you're assuming that everybody is the same level of expertise, but for example, any given function, if you have a very good person, they could handle it in, let's say, 2 hours, while a new person that's just been hired will take 4 to 6 hours to handle a particular job. How do you take that into account?
Yeah, what you need to do is define different levels of competency. So it's a great question. I had thought about showing this, but now I will. So Passport, back to the challenges they had last year, they were basically short-staffed of program officers during the pandemic because nobody was requesting their passport. So a lot of the passport officers got redeployed into things like the STEM program and so on. Not all of them came back. So there was a huge training effort put in place to hire and then train. So they had different levels of certification. So you would start off as you'd be able to do simple renewals, and then with a bit more training you could do simple adults, and then you could do child simple and so on. So with each of the trainings, so they pass certification levels, the efficiency and where those resources are actually deployed would be different, and then the rates by which they would do their work would be different as well. So we actually had efficiency rates here, how well a trainee could do in comparison to a fully certified individual. And then we can segment those labor groups too. So it's not, as you point out, just one big group of program officers. They have program officers that do examinations, handle rejections, do calls. They may all have different skills and different capabilities. So the unit times by which they do that can be adjusted, and you can flex those ratios. And that becomes part of your scenario planning, is how quickly can we kind of move these people along and get their expertise up, and what's the impact of that going to be? How do we improve our training? Maybe we need to have a better training budget so we can justify moving from 10 minutes per application to 8 minutes per application. If we can do that through this training program, we can actually test that out. So I've been doing modeling. I mean, CVP's only been around for 4 or 5 years. We've been using modeling tools like this for the last 30 years. This was just a unique opportunity to do it in the QualiWare environment per se. There's never been a business operation, and I've worked internationally, and I've worked in pretty much every type of sector that cannot be modeled with some of these core components.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Walter. Appreciate that question. Thank you, Mike. I'm just going to talk slowly for a moment in case anybody else has any other questions. But Mike, I really do appreciate your time. I hope the folks on the call here, while you may not be directly in the area that Mike was talking about, you can see the applicability of the tool in various parts of your organizations, and with some of the work that Mike has been doing with QualiWare, in the future state, can see that it would be a really interesting component to add into your QualiWare family. So,
and I'll point out that Bob just came on online there too, so there's a familiar face to many of you. So if you do have any deep dive technical questions, Bob certainly is available to answer. There is actually a website we have for cbp-software.com. And you can get more information. It's certainly more sales and marketing oriented. It's not a technical website, but Bob's there to answer any questions that you may have as well. So it is definitely a commercial product.
Walter, did you have another question?
Yeah, I have another question. This seems like a great idea. On the other hand, there must be some point of diminishing returns. Like if you're dealing with processes that require 20 people, it's obviously a good idea. On the other hand, maybe processes that require only 5 people working on them, then, optimizing 5 people may not give you as much return as optimizing 20, 50, or 100. So is there a point where it's no longer cost effective to do this?
No, I wouldn't say cost effective. I guess it depends on what value you put in improved understanding. I mean, we have done, I remember early on, not with CVP, I remember doing work with a small bed and breakfast in PEI, believe it or not, and they wanted to understand their different costs and their flows and things like that. So the concepts work. We kind of did that. I think we did that in exchange for a few nights or something like that. So it really depends on the organization. The cost of the software, well, it's on the Salsa. You can actually, it's a subscription. So what is I think the entry is probably 20 to 30,000 a year, right? So yeah, if you want to do an ROI, you probably would want to look at potentially saving that at a minimum. It doesn't take much though to generate the savings and the understanding, and part of that is the improved collaboration, because you need operation people working with finance people, working with program people, and that's truly, and it was named collaborative business planning for a very definite reason. So,
thank you.
Great. Thank you, Walter. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Bob, for joining. Thanks for everybody for joining. I'm going to reshare my screen. We will be having a user group meeting in June, as I mentioned at the beginning. Some of you may not have been on the call when I went through the housekeeping piece of that. So we are going to have a user group meeting in June. It's going to be in person. We're going to have an open house at our office. content for the meeting and exactly when and the timing of it still to be determined, and we'll have that out in the next few weeks to let everybody know. And I think that's about it for the day. Thank you so much for your time. Carol, you have your hand up.
Yes, sorry, just quickly, for the open house, is it still going to be hosted virtual as well, or do we absolutely
That
have to
again
go?
is again still to be determined. So all of the details of that are to be figured out.
Okay.
We probably will do it both.
Yeah,
we will be,
I think it would be worth
yeah,
because I wouldn't be able to attend in-house, so.
right.
And
Understood.
I was really looking forward to the Archimate stuff today because we work a lot with it, so I don't want to miss that out unless you have a
Understood.
recording. Yeah. Okay.
Understood.
Thank you so
We
much.
will. Yeah, you're welcome, Carol. I appreciate it. Kelly, I just saw your note. It wasn't business architecture that we were talking about. We were going to be talking about Archimate. And in the interest of time, we've decided to move that to the next meeting because we're losing lots of people now that it's gone past 5 o'clock. So
no, I'm talking about actual training, business architecture training. It was on the agenda at the beginning of the meeting.
Oh, yes. The business architecture course is going to be offered in person in September.
Okay.
So it was on the agenda as an update as part of CloseReach News. So we're going to be offering a business architecture course in person. It will be in our offices September 12th to the 14th. The details will make its way up onto our website. It will be Roger Burleton providing that training.
Okay, thanks. There was quite a few people on my team that wanted to take that, so that's why I wanted to bring it up.
That's good
Thank
to
you.
know. Feel free to reach out to me for more details.
Will do.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. All right, thanks very much, everybody, for your time. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day and the sunny evening. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, Barry.
Thank you, Cecile.
Right.
Very well hosted.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cecile.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Cecile. Bye,
Bye, everybody.
Bye.